Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell says his new comprehensive plan proposal will bring more housing to every neighborhood. But will it be enough for a rapidly growing city?
Simply put, more housing, more quickly.
Mayor Harrell's roadmap for planning Seattle's growth over the next 20 years includes at least 100,000 new homes all across Seattle.
Every district in the city has a role to play in accommodating future growth.
Washington state requires cities to update their comprehensive plans every 10 years. And in 2024, Seattle is responding to a new state law that mandates an increase in housing density, especially in single-family neighborhoods.
The goal is to increase the supply and diversity of housing options.
The mayor's proposal would allow homeowners to have up to 6 units on their properties if they're affordable or near transit. But some say that doesn't go far enough.
What we're doing here is continuing the status quo.
Critics say, compared to the previous comp plan, the newly proposed version would only add about 20,000 more homes over the next 2 decades, well short of the city's projected needs.
We feel very confident that it will provide twice the capacity of that 100,000 number.
But the mayor's team says its projections are a floor, not a ceiling.
There's ample opportunity for, hopefully, the whole city to get involved.
And after years of discussion, the city wants your input as it pushes to reach a year-end deadline with Seattle's future growth at stake. We're breaking down the comprehensive plan next on City Inside Out. And joining us to discuss the comprehensive plan as comprehensively as we can, we have with us Rico Quirindongo. He is director of Seattle's OPCD, the Office of Planning and Community Development. Director Quirindongo, great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
We also have with us Tiernan Martin, who is Director of Research for Futurewise, a nonprofit that advocates for forward-looking land use policy, also is co-chair of the Complete Communities Coalition, which was formed to address the comprehensive plan. Tiernan, good to have you too.
Thanks, Brian.
And finally, almost finally, we're getting to you, Jamie. Inye is here. He is Inye Wokoma, co-founder of Wari, a group that speaks to the importance of black land ownership in gentrified communities. Inye, great to see you.
Thank you.
And Jamie, I couldn't wait to introduce you here. Jamie is, well, her day job is she's Director of Climate Action and Resilience for the Nature Conservancy, but she is here on behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission, of which she is a member. Jamie, great to have you too. All right, let's get this thing going here. To begin, I just want to make sure that I point this out to everybody. There is no way to discuss all the complexities of the comp plan within the span of 30 minutes. The hope here is to provide a good snapshot of this plan, ask some questions about it, and get some people engaged with this very important process. More information about some upcoming public forums are coming at the end of the show. But Director Quirindongo, maybe I can go big picture if I could to start with you. So this plan is built on these 4 pillars of housing affordability, equity and opportunity, connecting communities and neighborhoods, and dealing with climate change. What is your goal in putting together this comprehensive plan? Give a 10,000-foot view if you can.
We are required as a city to do a comprehensive plan every 10 years, which talks about what our growth will be over a 20-year cycle. So in this case, 2024 through 2044. Mm-hmm. We are also living in a time where we have a scarcity of housing. We are living in a housing crisis. That is a national problem, not just a local problem. But Seattle is no exception. Mm-hmm. We built over 12,000 units of housing last year. So it's not that we're not producing. We're just not producing fast enough, or at least what we have seen is that the city has grown in jobs faster than we've been able to produce housing units.
Got it.
So one of the goals of the plan is to provide greater density in areas of the city, and to do that surgically. We're also complying specifically with House Bill 1110, which was passed a year ago.
Yep, we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but keep going, yeah.
And that one will see a transformation of all of our neighborhood residential to allow a minimum of 4 units on any formerly single-family lot. And then we're also really trying to look at equity issues across the city, understanding that we do have a history of racist policies that were baked into our land use framework for the city? How do we now provide for generational wealth opportunities for BIPOC families?
Yeah.
And then how do we also ensure that as we do this upzone in neighborhood residential, that people can stay in place, they can age in place, they can invest in a property that they already own?
Okay.
How do we provide opportunities for first-time home buyers?
Okay.
How do we provide generational wealth opportunities?
Yeah.
And then finally, how do we lean into this concept of 15-minute cities where you can find a place to live,
Yeah.
you can walk to a grocery store, you can walk to a park, you can walk to your elementary school, and you can get on transit, get downtown to get to your job.
Which certainly helps some of these green objectives too.
Yeah.
And maybe I can jump in here and talk about some of these place types that I know are part of this. And I want to break this down for people so you know exactly what we're talking about. So take a look at some of these maps here. Dark blue, those are our regional centers where Seattle has its densest mix of housing, business, and transit. A third to 40% of the housing Seattle is planning for would be in these regional centers. Downtown is an example of a regional center. Cobalt blue, these are urban centers, 24 of them across the city. These areas will have density, not as much as the regional centers, but these are the parts where they're blurred a little bit. You can see right there, that shows us where some more growth is planned. Othello at Graham Street would be an example of an urban center. Then we've got these neighborhood centers that Director Quirindongo was talking about. A new designation here, 24 of these mixed-use areas in light blue around the city, those blurred dots you see right there. The plan is to rezone them to allow for more options, especially apartments. Maple Leaf, an example of a neighborhood center. Then we've got another new place type, urban neighborhoods, that light brown color you see on the map. That's just about all over the city. The mayor is proposing to allow for up to 6 plexes in these areas if units are affordable and near transit. And when you put all these together, this map has all kinds of options, as you can see. The gray parts are industrial areas, by the way. But I know there are always some questions about this. And Tiernan, maybe I can start with you. Does this go far enough in terms of the growth we're expecting for the city of Seattle?
Well, Futurewise agrees with all the goals that Director Quirindongo just laid out. But to answer your question, we are concerned that it doesn't go far enough. We know that the state legislature has recently passed several bills aimed at influencing comprehensive planning. They now require a climate element in the planning process. They require cities like Seattle to plan for housing that meets all affordability levels, and they require middle housing to be allowed in all residential parts of the city. Of course, Seattle is complying with those laws, but there's room to go beyond the requirement, and that's what we're not seeing in the draft plan that was released a couple weeks ago.
Thank you. Before I jump over to Inye here, just a brief response to that, because I know you've heard this a lot.
Right. So, it was an interesting discussion that we had as it related to a policy framework for the upzone. Was HB 1110 a floor or a ceiling? We believe that it was a baseline to grow from. So where we've provided additional density on top of the HB 1110 requirement, added density along transit corridors, and in particular transit-oriented development nodes, sound transit stationary locations, as well as our bus rapid transit lines. You'll see in the plan that we have, we're required by HB 1110 to do 4 units and 6 units in locations across neighborhood residential, 6 if you're providing affordable units.
And it's near transit, yep.
And it's near transit. We're also proposing that we allow an additional affordable housing bonus, an additional story, so you could go up to 4 stories and do up to 10, 11, 12 units.
I see.
And we're adjacent to transit. And then with these neighborhood centers, we're looking at 2, 4, and 6-story development opportunities within a neighborhood framework, particularly where there's pre-existing commercial center.
Okay, thank you. And I know we're going to dive into a few more of these issues. I wanted to make sure I established that floor, not a ceiling piece, which I think is a big part of what the city's talking about. But Inye, I wanted to talk to you about this. Wari has been involved with the planning around the comp plan for the past few years. I know providing some feedback here. How does this proposal, as you see it from the mayor, stack up when it comes to equity and opportunity and land ownership by black people?
Well, I think so first of all, we're still reviewing, digesting the plan. It's pretty large, lots of components. What I would say is that a lot of the language is in the plan that resonates with the priorities of our community. I think when we start to look at plans like these, we're thinking about, how are these things going to roll out? What do they look like on the ground, right? And a lot of times, when you have plans that create broad strokes, there are certain things such as, the middle housing bill, which, provide very specific goals and frameworks, but then there are the larger things such as, encouraging generational wealth and protecting and, sort of pushing back against displacement.
Yeah, those are hard to legislate.
Those are things that are hard to legislate because that's where the interface between, the public sector and the private sector comes into play.
Yeah.
And what's harder to predict is how does the marketplace, respond to, new opportunities, which basically the comp plan provides new opportunities for developers to do new things, right? And the question is, a lot of times, the private sector responds to the lowest hanging fruit first, right? And so, there's a lot that, the plan promises in language that, we as a community are really looking at, what does it look like, what's it going to look like when it rolls out, and how do we have to stay engaged to make sure that our interests are met?
Thank you. That's a great point. Rico?
Can I add to that? So there's a couple of things I'm really interested as we go out into community and talk about the plan, what we can do for legacy homeowners. So black families, as we all know, 20 years ago, the Central District was 70% black families. Now it's 10% black families. As we do the subzone, we want to make sure that there aren't predatory development practices where a developer comes into town, comes to your door and hands you a letter and says, "Let me buy your house for you so I can develop your property."
Right.
What we want to do is create some legacy homeowner policies where a black family is incentivized to actually stay in their home, to invest, have access to capital so they can build 2 units in their backyard, one in their basement, and actually see a reverse mortgage, and also be able to have more than one generation live on the property.
Right. I'm going to get back to that in just a second, but I did want to make sure I talk to Jamie about climate because you've been working on that part of the plan here for years. What's your take on how the mayor is responding to these issues of climate change, sustainability, as we plan for the next 2 decades?
Well, I think what's really exciting about the opportunity of this comp plan is to integrate both climate change and racial equity into the comp plan, and that hasn't been done as clearly before in the past. I think with the passage of HB 1181 that I know Futurewise and Teensy both worked on together to get that passed, that really is requiring now a lot of jurisdictions to incorporate climate change resilience planning into their comprehensive plans. And technically it passed too late for the city to be required to do it, but they're doing it anyway, which I think is great. I appreciate that it's broken down into kind of 2 different sections. We actually have a climate resilience section, which is great, that we're addressing extreme heat and smoke and flooding and all these things in there. Always there's opportunity for growth and to address different things. And so as a commission, we're really looking to dive deeper into these sections of the plan and look at what are the connections to growth and where we're allowing growth, and what are the connections to transit and displacement, because as people get displaced further out of the city, you're going to have to increase your carbon footprint if your jobs are in downtown. So we're looking at all those things.
Well, and I would say that the neighborhood center concept, which is new to the growth strategy, is a explicit attempt to create for new development opportunities so that people can live in the city in a denser environment where they have access to everything that they need and are close to transit, so that they don't have to have a car and that can be a part of their reduction of carbon footprint.
Right.
I
Please.
think to add to that, outside of my day job and on the commission, we're very concerned about anti-displacement and making sure that that's really robust. And so we're excited to see that anti-displacement was throughout the plan.
Yeah.
But I think to Inye's point, there's only so much you can do in a comp plan. And so what is going to accompany that? What are the policies that are going to help people stay in place? So I know that there's supposed to be an anti-displacement framework coming out in a few weeks. So really looking forward to seeing what's in there.
I am too, and maybe we can go down that path just a little bit, because there was a map that was put together of this as well by the mayor and the department, OPCD. These areas in pink, so neighborhoods with high displacement risk, some in South Seattle, parts of South Park to the west, some areas in North Seattle too. So slightly lower density, 3 units on a lot will be allowed in these areas, essentially the same as what's allowed now. Inye, maybe I can bring in here, when you talk about that, what kind of impact do you think this kind of policy is going to have on preventing displacement?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say over the past several years, a lot of the development has been centralized in certain neighborhoods, right? And so the pressure has been high, right? And again, this is where the intersection between the private sector and the public sector comes into play, because developers are going to go where they can make the most money for their projects. Sure. So I think, I think what is hopeful in the proposed plan is sort of the sharing of the load across the city, right? I think that's the first basic, most conceptual step, and it's what our community has been asking for. It's like, listen, particularly when there was a lot of, critique around MHA. Right, and
mandatory housing affordability.
The mandatory housing affordability. Which of course incentivize folks, to look at certain neighborhoods as development opportunities. Right. So I think as the city starts to take a stance and say, okay, we need to make sure that there are opportunities for density across the board. It doesn't de facto mean that there aren't going to be pressures in our community. I think those pressures are going to continue to be there. But I think it provides a little bit of breathing room for us to start to think about doing things differently.
Thanks. Tiernan, I want you to jump in.
Sure, yeah. I wanted to lift up the point that Inye just made about how our growth strategy that we've had for the last 30 years or so has really concentrated displacement pressure in the communities where we have the most renters, the most people of color, and the most low-income households. I think this plan is an opportunity to change that, to move to a different framework. We're interested in understanding better how the growth strategy incorporates this anti-displacement focus. What we see right now in the draft plan is that in those high displacement risk neighborhood residential areas, only 3 units would be allowed.
Right.
3 homes allowed on a single lot. And then in the rest of the city, it's the state requirement of 4. What we have there is a net loss in the amount of housing production. What we would like to see is, in the low displacement risk parts of the city, can you bump it up a bit so that we're still achieving the total amount of goal, but we're prioritizing reducing displacement pressure in the high displacement risk areas.
Director Quirindongo, please,
Well, and I think that's why both along transit corridors, transit-oriented development opportunities, and in the neighborhood centers, we are trying to add additional density, which gets that offset that you're suggesting. If we're trying to provide a cap to disincentivize developers to come into high displacement areas and allow people that live in those neighborhoods to do their own development, then in other areas of the city, we are trying to signal do more development in these transit locations and in these other neighborhood center areas of higher density so that we can get more units.
I did want to follow up on this idea, and Inye brought this up earlier, is who's going to take that signal? Because I think this is a piece of this. And Tiernan, maybe I can start with you here. So we've been talking about House Bill 1110. State passed this law last year to increase this amount of missing middle housing, as it's called in our state, so duplexes, fourplexes, trying to get some more housing infill here. I just think back to some other cities. Minneapolis comes to mind here. Local leaders have said, no more single-family zoning. That was back in 2019, and then I've seen it reported maybe 17 new triplexes were built over the next 4 years. I guess my question is this going to pencil out? Will it make financial sense for developers in Seattle to build projects with the guidelines that the mayor is suggesting here?
Well, I'm not a developer, but we do certainly look at case studies from cities like Minneapolis, like Portland, to learn from their experiences. And we think that when we look at what's in the draft plan right now, we do see some areas of concern, that the floor area ratio, the tool that the city uses to regulate sort of the bulk of buildings, may be set too low to allow for private developers to get projects that would pencil. So we do see some things that we like in the city's plan, but we think that there's room to add bonuses and incentives that can really make sure that the private market is able to come in and actually produce the homes that the city plans for.
You know, the plan's been out for a little bit over 2 weeks, so we're still in our initial stages of review, but I think that we have some folks who are of the opinion that, you know, there could be more done, and there's some folks who are still kind of digging in and trying to figure out where, because I think this question of like, where's the growth going to go is a big thing, because I think Tiernan made a really good point of, we have been operating off of a system that was built in 1994 that didn't have any racial equity lens, that didn't have climate considerations in it. And I think that we do have a big opportunity to address a huge housing crisis. Are we going to meet the demand? Are we going to do it in a way where it's not just opening it up to whoever, but actually ensuring that low-income folks can afford home ownership opportunities, communities of color can stay in place. So I think that, as we dig into this, we have been advocates for Neighborhoods for All. We produced a report around that. Some of our recommendations from that actually came out in this comp plan of the neighborhood centers. We called them urban hamlets, which is arguably a worse name.
That's a way
so I'm so glad that was not the name that ended up in the plan.
To speak, perchance to dream. Keep going.
But I do think that we are interested in seeing like livable, walkable, affordable communities that folks can access even their cultural resources. One of the things we're looking at with anti-displacement is like our cultural anchors and culturally relevant grocery stores and all these things also able to stay in place, not just people, but also all those other elements.
Nick, can I have you weigh in on this, please?
Yeah, so I want to sort of preface what I'm about to say by saying that Wari is primarily an organization that leverages the power of art and cultural activism to address a lot of these core issues. And in doing so, we tend to think a little bit outside the box, sometimes a lot outside of the box, right? And trying to solve problems. And one of the things that, that we observe a lot is that the way that the system is constructed is that it actually only incentivizes certain kinds of quote-unquote developers, right? And really, when we look at what the need is in our community, is we're looking at, first and foremost, as far as Wari, legacy homeowners and their families as being the frontline developers for our communities for properties that they already own, right?
Okay.
And so then, but that opens up a Pandora's box, because some of the barriers, are around the bureaucracy around permitting.
Sure.
Right? Permitting and land use, and which is a costly and a time-consuming enterprise and very technical, right? And so there's a high barrier of entry for there, right? But then there's the financing piece, which is the more complicated piece for public entities to weigh in on.
Sure.
But I think that there are ways for us to think outside the box to figure out how can we incentivize, or create various mechanisms. So I want to encourage, some out-of-the-box thinking. So, for instance, Wari participated in an effort at OPCD around equitable development zoning.
Yes.
Right, and whereas a community stakeholder process, Wari was a part of that process. That really looks at, Wari was a part of sort of, imagining, how that model took shape inside of OPCD. That really looks at, creating a framework that allows for community organizations to repurpose properties, lowering the barriers for them to repurpose properties in ways that create opportunities inside the community. And can we extend those opportunities to individual homeowners to begin to engage in the process of building duplexes, triplexes, dadus on their properties that then they can create density for their families, right? I think those are some of the outside of the box questions that we want to start to ask.
Please.
I'm really glad you brought up the equitable development zoning work. I think what's really important about that is the comp plan does provide a framework for investments that the city makes, for our policies that are brought forth by all of our departments, but it can't do everything. And so, this separate legislation, we passed legislation last year.
Okay.
We're looking at another package this year. There's work that we're trying to do in the community to change other zoning policies and building code requirements to ensure that if you are a small business owner, landowner, you already own a home, like you have the ability and have some, frankly, preferential treatment to encourage people to stay, and for BIPOC folks that have been forced out of the city due to cost, that they can actually come back.
Okay, thank you. We need to start wrapping up here. There's been a great conversation. I know it was way too short. I know I was going to get that laugh too.
There's so much more we can do.
There's a ton. But Jamie, I really do think the key of this is getting people involved and getting people having their public input front and center here. Can you talk about this? The average Seattleite there that's trying to understand the comp plan, why now? Why is now the time to pay attention to this?
Well, this only happens once every, I think the process starts 8 years before, but it doesn't happen that often. And I kind of talk about it as it's the plan to rule them all. It's
the Super Bowl of planning.
It's the Super Bowl of planning. It's the if you think about it as this plan sets the guidance for all the other plans. This is what, when the Seattle Transportation Department is looking to plan out something for transit, they're looking at the comp plan guidance first to be are we in alignment with that? Yeah. So this is really the framework that is setting the vision for our city for the next 20 years. And, we want to get it right this time. So.
Got it. Inye, the 30-second version, if you can, just to wrap up. Exhortations to the public. What do you got?
I would say, we do community work, so, get involved. I know, comp plans, can cause the average citizen to have a deer in the headlights type of reaction, but, when you get into it, really, it is about, getting in and making sure that what your priorities are based on your day-to-day experience are heard by policymakers.
Thanks. Tiernan, some final thoughts, 30 seconds if you can.
Yeah, I'd encourage the viewers to think about themselves and their future and what options they want to have. Do they want to move into a bigger home? Do they want to downsize? Do they want to have options when they go throughout this city? And do they want their neighbors to have options? We see too many people having to leave cities like Seattle or not choosing to move here in the first place. This is the plan that's going to set us up to allow yourself and your neighbors to stay here, and you have an opportunity to get engaged and to share your opinion.
Thank you. Director Quirindongo, to finish this up, I know the clock's ticking for the mayor to get some legislation to the city council. Yes. Got the state deadline, end of the year here. Are we on track for that? What are the next steps? If you can keep it short, that'd be great.
So we are on track to deliver something to council before the end of the year for consideration. I really encourage folks to attend the open houses. It's really a good opportunity to ask questions of all the planners at OPCD and the mayor's office.
And let me tell people a little bit more about that, because if you want to weigh in on the comp plan, there's a list of open houses around the city. You can see them on your screen right now, including a citywide virtual open house on May 2nd, after which public comment will start to wrap up. Check out engage.oneseattleplan.com. Use that QR code on your screen. You can connect online with comments as well. A big thank you to our panel, and we will be right back. What are people saying online about Seattle's comp plan draft? One person writes, "The time is right for these changes. Seattle residents need to give up the small town vibe and admit that we are a city and need to build like a city, even if it hurts some people's feelings." Another person comments, "Seattle's comp plan seems underwhelming in terms of meeting housing needs in the coming decades." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. Thank you for that input. Thank you for some great input from this panel, and we will see you next time on City Inside Out.